Yes, yes, yes.
It's 6 p.m. So,
Yes.
Professor Jain, would you like to begin?
Yes.
All right.
So thank you, Professor Theodor, Ithamar Theodor from Israel, to give us this webinar, your insights, your research on the Bhagavad Gita. You've written 2 books. Today's webinar's topic is exploring the Bhagavad Gita, philosophy, structure, and meaning. And you are an associate professor of Hindu studies at Zephyr Academic College, Safed, Israel, a graduate of the Theology Faculty, University of Oxford, and a life member of Clare Hall, University of Cambridge. Your publications include Exploring the Bhagavad Gita, Philosophy, Structure, and Meaning, that came in 2010. Then Brahman and Tao, Comparing Studies in Indian and Chinese Philosophy and Religion, that came in 2014. Very interesting. Very less books on those topics of Indian and Chinese philosophy comparison. Then your third book is The Fifth Veda in Hinduism, Philosophy, Poetry, and Devotion in the Bhagavad Puran, which is called as Pancham Ved. Then that came in 2016. And the next book yours is Dharma and Halacha, Comparative Studies in Hindu and Jewish Philosophy and Religion, 2018. Very interesting also. And finally, the Bhagavad Gita, A Critical Introduction, that came just this year, 2021. So hot off the press. Welcome, Professor. And we all look forward to learning from you. 56 participants. Great going. Sir, please begin. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Pankaj Jain, for your kind invitation. First of all, I would like to just say that my prayers are with all suffering from the COVID in India. We are very much aware of the calamities, and again, we send our prayers and very good wishes to all. I'm very happy about this invitation, and I'm very happy to share some thoughts on my work. Basically, we're talking about two books. This is the book which was published here in 2021, the Bhagavad Gita Critical Introduction. It's an edited volume, but we will not talk so much about this book. Rather, my main thrust today is to talk about this book, which is called Exploring the Bhagavad Gita, Philosophy, Structure, and Meaning. This was published in the UK, and just recently, or 2 years ago, there came an Indian edition published by Routledge in Delhi. So this is the book, Exploring the Bhagavad Gita, Philosophy, Structure, and Meaning. So people ask me, what is your innovation in the studies of the Bhagavad Gita, or how do you perceive of this text? What is your point of view? What are you trying to say? And I would say, before going into the text, that I see the Bhagavad Gita as a potentially philosophy, a world philosophy for the 21st century, and that is perhaps my larger claim, that the Bhagavad Gita actually has a structure, and having a structure, it can serve as a philosophy which can accommodate many cultures and many points of view. It's very flexible, it's very wide, and it also has an ethical system which can further, or which can, I would say, survive postmodernity and serve as a foundation for global ethics, actually global ethics. So that is my larger argument, or claim, or perhaps implicit in my work, that I treat the Gita as a major source of philosophy. In many ways, this also happened like 2,500 years ago to Greek philosophy. At first, the Greek philosophy was practiced in religious settings, religious surroundings. You had people like the Pythagoreans, who were living in ashram kind of setting, living together, worshiping the Greek gods, practicing various rites, being vegetarians or vegans, and doing philosophy. And gradually, the tradition kind of secularized or universalized their teaching and made them universal and non-religious and applicable. And that's how, I mean, the Western world emerged from this Greco-Roman roots. And that's the history of Western philosophy and thought. And similarly, I think that many people see the Bhagavad Gita as a religious text, something which you study from a guru in an ashram setting with religious wisdom, which is fine. It's all true. I'm all for that. But perhaps what I'm doing, I'm trying to articulate the Bhagavad Gita, to organize, to show its structure, and perhaps take it more to the philosophical, the theological, the universal realm, and present it as a potential philosophy, which I think for various reasons may very much suit the 21st century. I actually I published an article about that in an Indian publication a few years ago, arguing that the Bhagavad Gita represents Asian philosophy and its best, and with the rise of Asia in the 21st century, this may well occupy a more prominent place. But please let me now go a little into into my own work on the content of the Bhagavad Gita. Let us speak about the contents of the Bhagavad Gita, see what are the ingredients in the Bhagavad Gita, and then I try to suggest a kind of structure or a way of bringing all of them together, which is perhaps at the heart of my work. So now at this point, I just want to discuss a few of the Bhagavad Gita's contents. So first of all, let us talk about Dharma, which is perhaps the basic layer of the Bhagavad Gita. Dharma, central to Indian thought. How can we translate Dharma? Dharma, religion, duty, morality, justice, law, and order. All these represent Dharma, that which sustains. Dri is the root, the dhatu, which holds human society and actually the whole world. Dharma, in a larger, in a deeper sense, is also the nature of everything. It aspires to place everything, not only the human being, but the whole world in its proper place. The Dharma of the teacher is to teach. The Dharma of the sun is to shine. This is the nature, the essence of every phenomenon, and it aspires to establish human society on a solid moral foundation. Also in terms of ecology, we have to say, echoing Professor Pankaj Jain's work, of course, also ecology. Basic Hindu Dharma speaks about Varna and Ashrama. It divides society into 4 Varnas and 4 Ashramas. You know them, we will not go into that, but that's the basic, I would say, a framework of the moral framework of the Bhagavad Gita. But then we have another principle. This is the Upanishadic principle of Moksha, and that is a completely different idea. That idea doesn't speak about dharma and humanism and, and prosperity in the world, but that looks at the whole world from a completely different point of view, from as the world of samsara. This looks at the world from a rather pessimistic point of view, that this world is actually represents a cycle of birth and death called samsara. This world is considered to be temporary, in transit, and is not a goal in itself. And perhaps a small quote, having come to me, these great souls do not again undergo rebirth into that transit abode of misery, as they have attained the highest perfection. All the worlds up to Brahma's world are subject to repeated birth, but having once reached me, there is no further rebirth. That is, of course, 8th chapter, And if I remember the Sanskrit, it's Ma Mupetya Punarjanma Dukalayam Ashashvatam Napluvanti Mahatmana Samsidim Parama Mama and Abrama Bhuvanaloka Punar Avartinor Juna Ma Mupetya Tukuntaya Punar Janma Na Vidyate. And the translation I've already read. So that is a different worldview altogether, and that is also a very central principle in the Bhagavad Gita. It holds together both the idea of dharma, which is, as I mentioned, humanistic, realistic, aspires for a prosperity in this world, but also it adheres to the Upanishadic idea of moksha, which sees this world in a completely different, from a completely different perspective or a vision. So that is a central tension which is there in the Bhagavad Gita between dharma and moksha. And I would argue that the Bhagavad Gita upholds both principles at the same time and reconciles them in various ways, which we'll come to that later. Actually, sorry, the tension is so clear, so much so that Arjuna is asking actually twice in the text, at the beginning of the 3rd chapter, and then at the beginning of the 5th chapter, Krishna to specify what actually he should do. Should he adhere to his dharma of a kshatriya and go and fight, or rather should he look for enlightenment and renounce fighting? And let me quote, "O Janardana, if you consider enlightenment to be better than action, why then do you enjoin me to perform this terrible act? Your equivocal-like words confuse my mind. I beg you, make it certain of one thing by which I may attain the best." So this is a major tension in the Bhagavad Gita, that between that of dharma, working in the world, adhering to one's duty, and renouncing the world, and looking at the world as as a place of samsara. Then we have the Vedic sacrifices, along with their humanistic worldview, and that is, of course, an expansion of the world of dharma. And we have to see that the Bhagavad Gita is Vedic. It does adhere to the Veda. As I mentioned, it is dharmic, and that is the same thing as adhering to the Veda, because being Vedic, it also adheres to the Vedic social system of Varna and Ashrama, which I already mentioned. But the main principle here is the sacrificial principle, which is there and is very central to the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is Vedic, is adhering to these Vedic ideas, to the Vedic sacrifices, and it does assume the three worlds, the Vedic idea of 3 worlds, and Svarga and Naraka and so forth. So just to mention that the Vedic point of view is also part of the Bhagavad Gita, of course. Then we have the next component, which is very strongly there in the Bhagavad Gita, and that is the yogic component. The Bhagavad Gita is indeed a yogic text. It has a very deep component of yoga. It speaks about yoga. It encourages yoga. It speaks much about yoga, and that is very close to the Upanishadic point of view. Of course, we know that yoga metaphysics is dualistic because it speaks about the Purusha and Prakriti, whereas the Vedantic or Upanishadic point of view is Advaita, is monistic, looks at the identity of Atman and Brahma in various ways. Of course, I know there's medieval Vedanta, which has different articulation of this identity, whether it's Advaita Vedanta or Vishishta Advaita Vedanta or Dvaita and so forth. So I know that, but still I'm putting this aside and saying that the basic yogic view is quite different. I mean, it's different from the humanistic point of view of Vedic and Dharmic points of view, but it's quite close to the Upanishadic point of view. And basically, it furthers a spiritualistic worldview. The fundamental individual element is the spiritual soul, whether it's the Purusha in yogic terms or Atman in Vedantin terms. And this is covered by various bodies that are not necessarily human, maybe bodies of plants, trees, reptiles, fish, animals, humans, gods, or something else. So the yogic point of view is indeed based upon the same Upanishadic, you may say, worldview, with this vision of souls encaged in samsara. And of course, it has an ethical implication in that it furthers liberation. Of course, liberation is Kevalya in yogic terms, but I'm not going into that. I'm not comparing Kevalya to Moksha. Let's leave this aside for now. But a very interesting thing is that the yogic ethics are quite different from the humanistic ethics of the world of Dharma. They are different because whereas the world of Dharma furthers prosperity as its main ethical principle, the world of yoga is different and it furthers samatva, equanimity in to both happiness and distress as its ideal. So that's another tension in the Bhagavad Gita. What is the ethical idea? Is it actually to prosper in this world, or is it actually to be equal-minded, to experience equanimity and sameness towards both happiness and distress? And that is all, this tension is also there in the Bhagavad Gita. Now, the yoga system, they are not only theoretical, not only trying to see reality, to have a darshan, to have a vision, but they also further practice, and they further abhyasa, constant practice, vairagya, detachment, struggle with the mind, strengthening the mind. How does it say? Yato yato nischalati manas chanchalam astiram tatos tato niyam yetad atmani evam vasham nayet. That the mind, the manas, is very powerful, and one has to struggle with it and bring it under the control of the self and not give up. So this yogic component in the Bhagavad Gita is also a very central and very much emphasized in the Bhagavad Gita, clarifying the consciousness, making the consciousness clear, making the consciousness transparent, and restraining the mind, purifying the mind, and practicing yoga in various ways. And here's a small quote: casting aside all desires arising from worldly intentions, he should subdue completely the combined senses through the mind. Little by little should he bring his mind to rest. While firmly controlling his consciousness, he should fix his mind on the self, contemplating nothing else from whatever and wherever the flickering unsteady mind wanders. This I already quote in Sanskrit. It is to be restrained and led back into the control of the self. So this is these yogic components. But now there's also something very interesting that in the yoga philosophy, the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, we have the very famous ladder-like structure. That's the famous yoga ladder. And that ladder speaks about yama and niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Yama is, of course, ethics, ahimsa, non-violence, satya, that's truth, asteya, non-stealing, brahmacharya, how you say brahmacharya, celibacy, and aparigraha, non-accumulation. And of course, we have niyama, which is a socha, santosha, socha purity, santosha, and that's satisfaction, and tapas, austerity, svadhyaya, self-learning or Vedic learning, and Ishvara Paridhanam, surrender to God, acceptance of God. And then we have, as I mentioned, asana, that's the various postures, famous postures, yogi postures, pranayama, breath control, pratyahara, withdrawing the senses, detaching them from their sense objects, and after that, dharana, preliminary meditation, dhyana, deep meditation, and samadhi, the other state. So that is very important because the Bhagavad Gita also, being a yogic text, has a ladder. And I will come to that soon, to that ladder in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a ladder of karma yoga, which is very much resembles the ladder of the Yoga Sutra. But I'll very soon come to that. But anyhow, that is also important to recognize the Bhagavad Gita's yogic layer or yogic component. Here, let me read a few verses from the 6th chapter. When the consciousness rests peacefully, restrained by the practice of yoga, then can the self see itself directly and thus be satisfied within itself. At that time, he knows infinite bliss experienced by an internal consciousness beyond the senses. Firmly established, he deviates not from the truth. Having attained this, he holds no other acquisition greater, and thus situated, even grievous misery does not shake him. Let it be known that the dissolution of the deep union with the misery is called yoga, and it should be practiced with wholehearted determination. Okay, now we have another component which may be a subcategory of yoga and Sankhya, and that is the gunas, the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. That is a very interesting concept. Its sources may be found in the Sankhya Yoga philosophy. And I will not go too much into the description of the gunas, but I would say that in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a very wide presentation of the gunas. I don't know of any other place, any other text which discusses the gunas in such a wide and deep way. We have discussion of the gunas in the 14th, 17th, and the first half of the 18th chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. That discussion has a very, I would say, very wide potential for an application, for applied ethics, really. How exactly, perhaps it may be a subject of a different paper or presentation, but that certainly requires a deeper look and to see how the Bhagavad Gita delineates the gunas, how it describes the gunas, and what are the ethical, I would say, implications of this word of gunas, or what can one do with the gunas in terms of the philosophy of ethics. Then we have the principle of karma, which is, of course, an Upanishadic principle, basically seeing action as described in the 13th chapter as sowing a seed in the field of the body. The body is considered to be the field, and the action is considered to be sowing a seed in that field, and that seed fructifies either in this life or the next life. Won't go too much into that, but the Bhagavad Gita is very interested in the idea of action. What is action? Let me read from the 4th chapter. What is action? What is inaction? Even the wise are confused in this matter. Now I shall explain to you the subject matter of action. Having known this, you shall be free from evil. One must know what action is, karma. One must know what improper action is, vikarma, and one must know what inaction, akarma, is, as profound indeed is the course of action. So proper action is performed in accordance to duty or dharma. We return to our original point that dharma is the framework for all the Bhagavad Gita, and improper action would be contrary to dharmic. But then we have another principle, which is action for its own sake, without regard to the fruits. And that is a main principle in the Bhagavad Gita, and we will come to that. But in short, karmani eva dikaraste ma paleshu kadachana makarma pala heturbur mate sangast karmani. You have a right to perform your dharmic action, but without regards to the fruit, without interest, without attachment to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the doer of action, and never be attached to inaction. Okay, the Bhagavad Gita also has an educational doctrine, but I will skip that. I will not go too much into that, but I will mention the idea of bhakti, and that is a very important principle which is there in the Bhagavad Gita, and it speaks about devotion to a personal God, to Krishna, the Lord of the Bhagavad Gita, and that brings everything together. And I will show how, perhaps just as time is running, just say patram pushpam palam toyam yome bhaktya prayachati tadaham bhakti uparitam ashnami prayatatmanaha. If one offers me with love and devotion a fruit, a flower, or a water, or a leaf, I will accept that. And the end of the Bhagavad Gita, the conclusion, always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, and pay your homage unto me. Thus you will undoubtedly come to me. I promise you this, as you are dear to me. And Charama Shloka, of course, Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mamikam Sharanam Vraja Aham from Sarapapebyo Moksha Ishai Masuchaha. Abandon all dharmas and take refuge in me alone, and I shall release you from all evils. Do not fear. So, okay, I think by now I have more or less tried to summarize the basic contents of the Bhagavad Gita, and I try to show the complexity. Okay, let me be a little more academic and make an argument here, that many scholars say that the Bhagavad Gita is a very rich text, and it's a text of wisdom. You have many wonderful ideas, and all these ideas are very deep, and they represent Hinduism and Indian wisdom in a very deep way. However, the critique goes, they are not consistent. They don't have a backbone. They are not. You cannot bring them together into one doctrine. They are eclectic, kind of many ideas coming together, which are not consistent. So my work in this book, Exploring the Bhagavad Gita, is to argue for the structure of the Bhagavad Gita, and please allow me to try to convince you too or at least explain what I'm trying to say. So when I look at the Bhagavad Gita, you know what? Maybe I'll do it differently. I'll do it in a different way. Yeah. Let me start from here. Now I'm sharing my screen, and you should be seeing this slide with this beautiful house. Actually, Sheldonian Theatre in Oxford. That's the house itself. And you have here 3 stories, 3 floors, living in the world of Dharma, world of yoga, and spiritual world. So I hope you're seeing this. And what I'm doing here, I'm looking at the Bhagavad Gita's metaphysics, and I'm dividing them into 3 layers. That is a division into 3 layers of the Bhagavad Gita. I'm trying to explain that in my work, that the assumptions in terms of ontology and ethics are different. Whereas in the first floor, world of Dharma, you have, in ontological terms, you have the human being, a man or a woman, a human being. That is a complete term. And the human being living in the world of Dharma, performing Vedic sacrifices, etc., has his or her a goal to be prosperity, to live happily in this world, to be happy, to be healthy, to have good education, good family, good life, to have the gods share all the blessings. So the ontology would be that that's a human being living in the world, and the ethics would be to prosperity. That is considered to be a good thing. Now, the world of yoga is different. That is a different understanding of the world that would see the world in a different eyes. It would see it through the world of samsara, as I described before. And the ontological point of view would be different. In this world of yoga, you will not have any more human beings, but rather this is a spiritualistic point of view. You have here spirit souls, whether Atman or Purusha, doesn't matter from my point of view, but you have spirit souls being encaged in various forms of bodies. And the ethics here are also different. It's not anymore the ethics of prosperity. What you have here is the ethics of indifference, of equal-mindedness, samatva. To be a good yogi, you have to be equal-minded in happiness and distress, to regard alike gold and metal and everything. These are the ideas of Bhagavad Gita. So I'm trying to show very, very clearly that there's a difference between these 2 layers in terms of worldview, in terms of ontology, in terms of ethics. And then you have the third floor, which is the liberated state, the state of moksha. And that is a whole different state. You don't have so much about this in the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita doesn't speak so much about this third floor, but it speaks a little about that state here and there, and a few verses. I'm aware of the medieval polemics, whether it is a spiritual world in terms of Vaikuntha or it's impersonal Brahman. I'm aware of the polemics between Shankara and Ramanuja and Madhva. I'm aware of that. But to my mind, this is not so important in the Bhagavad Gita, but the world of moksha is there. So that is the 3 layers, the three stories house through which I see the Bhagavad Gita, and I see how the layers coexist with each other. Here you see down here, you have the Vedic layer and the Dharma layer. Here you have the Upanishadic and the Yoga layer, and here you have the Moksha or Kevalya layer. Now, you may ask, how do these work together? And here, I am trying to expose, to show the ladder. As I mentioned, there's also a ladder here. This is a traditional ladder. It's not my invention. You can actually find the roots. I found it in Vishwanath Chakravartin. He was a 18th century Vaishnav commentator on the Bhagavad Gita. He has this idea, and it was developed, but it's a traditional idea, considering the Bhagavad Gita to also have its own ladder. By the way, if you look into the Gita, you find this ladder in the 12th chapter. In the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, you have this ladder actually going from up downwards. But that's at the end of the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. But I look for other places to show it, and that you have to go into the text to see how it looks like. But they actually see this ladder as a ladder of internal motivation. It's an ethical ladder. The idea is that one performs one's dharma, one adheres to one's dharma, and in adhering to one's dharma, one may purify, sublimize one's motivation. I may perform my dharma out of simple utilitarianism. I may perform my dharma out of deeper dharmic utilitarianism. I may perform my dharma for its own sake, action for its own sake, dharma for its own sake. That's karmani eva dikaraste, that 247 very famous verse. I may perform my dharma for the highest good. I may perform my dharma as a practice of yoga. That's a little complicated to see, but it may be a practice of yoga. And I may perform my dharma, everyone, as a devotional, as an offering of bhakti. So this is the ladder, which is perhaps at the heart of my work, my trying to philosophize the Bhagavad Gita, and basically saying that there's a structure to the Bhagavad Gita, that the various ideas coexist with each other in a coherent way. There's place for dharma, for Vedic sacrifice, for yoga, for Upanishadic point of view, for bhakti. It all works together. Where you have this ladder, you see, here's the ladder: simple utilitarianism, dharmic utilitarianism, duty for its own sake, offering the fruits to the supreme good, turning ethical action into yoga, and unalloyed spontaneous devotion to Krishna. And this corresponds to the floors which I've described. All these stages are still in the humanistic realm. These stages are in the spiritualistic, the yogic realm, the second floor. And this is the final realm of moksha. So that's what I call the three-story house metaphor, dividing the Bhagavad Gita into three layers and showing, highlighting the ladder of karma yoga, similar to the ladder of yoga, Patanjali's ladder of yoga. Here you have the ladder of karma yoga. I think my time is out, but let me just try to show something. I didn't plan to show it, but anyhow, if you are here, it will take me a second, and I'll try to show one review of my work. I mean, the book was published originally in 2010, and there were various reviews. So I'd like to show one review which was published in the Journal of Hindu Studies by by the American philosopher Carl Olson. So I guess you now see the screen, and I'll read a little. Let's see what he says. He says, after all the previous attention devoted to the Bhagavad Gita over the years by scholars and others, it is difficult to imagine that someone could contribute anything new to a discussion about the contents of this important text. located within the larger Mahabharata epic. But Ithamar Theodor does accomplish the task of throwing new light upon the epic text with his carefully designed book. From Theodor's point of view, the Bhagavad-Gita is a coherent, theological, philosophical treatise that may be firmly unified as a single text because of its conceptual structure, its basic assumptions, and its prevailing ideas. In order to demonstrate the unifying structure of the text, the author uses the metaphor of a three-story house that includes the staircase leading upwards and connecting one floor with another. The three floors of the house represents different levels of reality, while ascending the staircase stands for a transformational ladder of ethical and spiritual refinement. Okay, I'll skip that and just go to the end of the review. Theodor's study, translation, commentary of the Bhagavad Gita is destined to assume an important place in the scholarship devoted to this epic text. This necessarily means that future scholars will have to consider Theodor's study or to be considered deficient in their scholarship. In summary, Theodor gives us his reader much to admire, think about, and appreciate. So I think I'm on time. It's 40 minutes. I think I should stop here, and thank you very much. Back to you, Professor Jain.
Thank you, Professor Professor Theodor. Thank you for this enlightening talk. We have 70 participants, and I think we all learned a lot from you and your insights, your ladder of yoga, your comparison with the similar hierarchy in Yoga Sutra and other philosophical traditions of India. Thank you very much. Let's take some questions, I guess. So the first question is, what are your views on including the principles of the Gita in the Western curriculum? That's the first question. And I don't
in Western curriculum, my views are very good. I mean, I first of all, I teach the Gita myself. I think what we're having is various ways the Gita is perceived. One way is within Hindu studies. People study Hindu studies, and then the category is religious studies, studying world religions. Hinduism is, of course, a world religion, and within Hinduism, studying the Gita as a Hindu text. That is one point of view. Another point of view is studying the Bhagavad Gita in relation to Indian nationality, the Indian national movement. Of course, we also have a chapter in our Bhagavad Gita critical introduction on how the Gita was perceived by scholars such as Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Sri Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, and that's also a point of view. But there's also, I would say, an interesting field emerging, which is called world philosophy. It's quite new, and not so many works in that world philosophy, but the world philosophy concept does look at the Gita as a world philosophy, something you can read just like Plato, Aristotle, Kant, and other great philosophers. So that is also emerging, and I, of course, very much encourage that. I think the Gita should be also learned as a world philosophy. So basically, I'm saying there are various categories for studying the Gita, certainly in terms of studying world religions and Hinduism, certainly as part of studying Indian history, 19th, 20th century Indian history in the national movement. But another thing which is very promising is studying the Bhagavad Gita in terms of a world philosophy, in terms of the emerging world philosophy field here. Thank you.
Excellent. That I also didn't know that it's emerging as a world philosophy, and it should. It's high time. Thank you for sharing that.
I can show you a book called Philosophies of Happiness by Diana. You know that, by Diana Lobel, and that was published by Columbia University Press in 2016. Quite new. And it's called Philosophies of Happiness, and you have quite a bit there on the Bhagavad Gita as a world philosophy. It's a wonderful field emerging.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Next question I'm taking from the last question by Professor Meera Chakravarti. Her question is, there seems to be no tension which you seem to propose in the Gita's yogic ideology and the Yoga Sutra, as Gita is a derivative of the main source from the Indian wisdom, there is no tension? I think she asked, actually, the question is to talk about the yogic ideology or Yoga Sutra, any tension or not within the Gita? That's the question, I think.
Well, I would say that the yoga ideology is very much compatible with the Bhagavad Gita. Very much compatible. The Bhagavad Gita is very yogic. You have many ideas of yoga. Actually, it also it propounds a karma yoga as perhaps the central doctrine of the Bhagavad Gita. And you have also classical yoga, Ashtanga yoga in the 6th chapter. You have also Jnana yoga. Jnana yoga is also there. Let me say that karma yoga, let's try to understand this term karma yoga. It has two components. One is karma and one is yoga. Now the karma, what is this karma? The karma is, if you like, Vedic karma, or if you like, dharma. Actually, I gave a paper in the 18th Sanskrit conference in Vancouver. I think you were there also. I'm not sure. No. You were there. You know, that was in 2018. And I gave a paper arguing that karma yoga is dharma yoga.
Oh, okay.
You see my point? So yes. That karma, which karma yoga speaks about, is actually karma or action according to dharma. So that is very much the Bhagavad Gita, karma yoga, which means turning the Vedic dharma into yoga. We have to see this, and that is perhaps one of the main points of the Bhagavad Gita. And that is how, maybe that is the great innovation of the Bhagavad Gita. Because when we talk of Vedic dharma, we talk in terms of svarga, performing sacrifice and going to svarga. Right. And perhaps the innovation of the Bhagavad Gita is taking this dharmic action and turning it into a form of yoga. Mind control, restraint. It's actually the ascending ladder of karma yoga. So yes, the Bhagavad Gita is very much yogic and is very much compatible with the Yoga Sutra.
Thank you, great. Just before the webinar started, you were talking about something, and there is a very relevant question that you were already sharing with me before the webinar started. This is from Stuti Mathur. The question is, do you believe that religious scriptures all around the world, from many different countries and cultures, have sense of commonality at any point of its deliverance? And what does this tell us about the belief in these scriptures? So common elements between different scriptures and cultures and countries.
Okay, so I would say that I actually published both a chapter in an Indian publication and also in my book, in the edited volume, the Bhagavad Gita, a critical introduction, arguing that the Bhagavad Gita can serve as the major Indian book. And also I gave a lecture, I think 2019 in Hong Kong, in the University of Hong Kong, arguing more or less the same, that the Bhagavad Gita can serve as the Asian book, not only, I mean, Indian, plus two Chinese religions, Confucianism and Taoism. So that would make it Asian and not only Indian. But basically, I would say that various religions, they're not all the same. I don't think all religions are the same. I think various religions are adopted to people in different times and places. Now, you may say that I am implicitly speaking Gita because I'm speaking about the avatar doctrine, that there are various avatars in the world. You may say that I'm implicitly a Baha'i, which is very close to the Gita, saying that various messengers are coming and offering various religious systems which are suitable to a certain time or place. You may also say that I'm talking in terms of the gunas and saying that various peoples have religions according to their gunas. If you see my point, that these people have more sattvic religion, these people are more rajasic. I can see all that. So this is all saying the same thing from various point of view. I very much believe in the power of religion, in the good power of religion, in the good sense of furthering ethics and humanity, humaneness, Ren, the Chinese Ren, and so forth. And I'm very much furthering unity between religions. But again, I'm not saying that all religions are the same. I'm not saying that. Various religions, they offer various ideas. They have the different emphasizing different things. Just take two Indian non-Vedic religions, Jainism and Buddhism. Both coming from, to my point of view, from the yogic tradition, but one emphasizing wisdom, Buddhism, the middle path, wisdom, and the other one, Jainism, emphasizing ecology. You know, you're writing about these things, and austerity, and a different point of view. Anyhow, so are Buddhism and Jainism the same? No, they're emphasizing different things. They're coming from the same tradition, but they have different emphasis. So yeah, that's basically what I'm saying, is that various religions, they have different ideas. But I'm also saying that the Gita is very, very rich in its ideas. I'm saying that the Gita is compatible with many religions. And as I mentioned, my publication earlier, that publication says how the Gita is compatible with Buddhism and with Jainism and with Sikhism and with Christianity and with Islam too, and with Judaism and with the Baha'i religion and with Zoroastrianism. And to each and every religion, I bring a few verses which I argue are compatible, that the people adhering to that religion would be very happy about them and feel. And, you know, I have to say something about it, about the Gita as the all Indian book. You mentioned that conference before, when we had our informal talk, that conference in 2005 in the Developing Society Center in Delhi, back then, like 2005. So I gave my paper, that conference on the Bhagavad Gita, and at the end of the paper, a professor came to me and said, "That was a very good lecture, wonderful. I'm very happy with you." So I said, "Thank you very much. That's very kind of you." And he said, "You'll be surprised. I'm not a Hindu. I'm a Muslim." He says, "I'm a Muslim professor, and I teach Muslim history of 13th century Delhi Sultanate. That's my profession." He says, "But," he says, "the Gita is our national book." He said. That was very inspiring. He said, "I'm proud of you and I'm proud of the Gita." He says, "I'm not Hindu, it's not my point of view, but I see the Gita as a national heritage, and I'm very happy to see you giving a good Gita talk." So that was a turning point for me. I said, wow, the Gita goes beyond Hinduism, beyond sectarian, you can say, or identity. It's much larger, and here some people are seeing that. So that was very inspirational for me. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will take next question. I'm taking from Dhwani Kothari, and she has asked, do you think the principle of ethics will change in the current situation of COVID-19, and how will the Bhagavad Gita guide us? By Dhwani Kothari.
Can you return the question? I didn't get it exactly.
Sorry, I'll speak slowly. Do you think the principles of ethics will change in the current situation of COVID-19, and how will the Bhagavad Gita guide us in this pandemic?
Oh, okay, I get it. COVID-19, will that change the world? Hopefully in a good way. Hopefully that will make us less of a consumerist, more careful about our behavior, more careful about the environment, in many ways. I hope that will make us less industrial and more spiritual. So that's my hope. Let's see what happens. But that's my hope. If I think it will happen, I'm not sure. To be honest, I don't know. But then then the question is, how will the principles of the Gita guide us? So actually, I have a paper which is to be published soon in a publication by Delhi University, and that I argue there that the Gita has a potential for a global ethics. And basically my argument goes that the current ethical systems, they spring or emerge from external categories, whether these are social identities, national identities, religious systems, which try to enforce the ethics on the human being. And I'm saying that as we enter into a post-global or a global era of post-modernity, these systems are becoming weaker and weaker because our identities are becoming weaker and weaker. Am I Indian or American? For example, I may live here and work there. What am I exactly? And am I a Jew or American, or what comes first? I mean, people have these questions. People say, I'm Jewish, I'm American, I'm I don't know, Republican or Democrat, whatever. I'm saying that the questions of complexity, identity becomes more and more complex. And the Gita's ethical system springs from internal categories. That's another argument which I didn't develop here, that Dharma is based upon one's gunas. That's very much Bhagavad-Gita. If my gunas, my constitution of my gunas is a certain constitution, that defines my dharmic duty or my ethics. And because it is internal and not external, it's not imposed from without, it's internal, springs from my own nature, I argue that it will be more suitable for a post-modern globalization. That the Gita is in many ways, I think, immune or more immune to a post-modernity than other systems. In other words, in post-modernity, we have a clashing of ethics. It's not a problem of post-modernity. We have all the world coming together, but everyone has a different ethical system. You have your system, I have my system, they have their system, who is right? And these are conflicting. It's part of the problem of globalization, that there's no agreement on global ethics. We have global commerce, that's not a problem. Everyone sells and buys in all directions. We have a global diplomacy, but ethics we don't have. There's no system of global ethics. What is right, what is wrong? And I think that the Bhagavad-Gita has this potential actually to unify East and West. That's what I really think. I think that the Gita is also compatible with Eastern systems. And as you mentioned before, I did do a comparative work on Indian and Chinese philosophy and religion. And actually I gave I chaired a session at the AR, I think it was San Francisco 2012, and presented the Gita in dialogue with Chinese thought. And Lori Patton was the respondent, and she said it was a very interesting reading of the Bhagavad Gita. I tried to emphasize the Gita's natural sides, not the religious sides, because that's the Chinese philosophy. I tried to show the gunas as compatible with yin, yang, and Tao. That's another story. It's there in my book, Brahman and Tao. And I also said that the Gita is compatible with Western ideology and with Western religiosity. And that's where the idea of divinity is emphasized. And anyhow, it was a nice discussion with Professor Lori Patton about it. Basically, I said that the Gita came west 19th century and so forth. And before that, I know Charles Wilkins, 1785, but anyhow, and the Western parts were emphasized, that Krishna is God like Christ and so forth. But if you take the Gita eastwards, then you'll have other parts being emphasized, which are the natural parts. And also the Vedic parts, which are compatible with the Confucian parts. But that's another story. I have a paper there in that book, a chapter. So basically, I see the Gita as a potential of bringing together East and West. East means Chinese civilization, Western civilization, and the Gita having being compatible with both sides. It's theistic, there's divinity, it's monotheistic, it's also natural. Anyhow, it's all there. If you're interested, I have written about it. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Next question I'll take from Bhushan Kumar Chaudhary. And he has asked the practical application of teaching of the Gita in an individual and universal level. Okay, let me go slow. I will. The practical application of teaching of the Bhagavad-Gita in an individual and universal level.
Well, individual level, I would say that the Bhagavad-Gita furthers dharma. It makes one a dharmic person. Dharmic person means moral, serving other people, serving the environment. It adheres to dharma, responsible and dharmic. And it has the spiritual path. The spiritual path is part of it. One adheres to dharma and makes spiritual progress, if you like, through one's dharma. One sublimates one's motives, one's become more spiritual, but remains dharmic. That is the whole point of the Bhagavad Gita. Even when one is liberated, still one is dharmic. There's a discussion in the 3rd chapter. Krishna says, look at myself. He says, I'm liberated. I don't need to follow dharma, but still I follow dharma to give example. So the Bhagavad Gita is dharmic all over. And at the same time, it furthers a progress, spiritual progress while following dharma. So that will be individual. As far as a global or wider application, I have some ideas there, I have to say. I have some ideas which were never realized practically, just ideas. But I'm trying to further the idea of, I call it neo-Brahmanism or neo-Dharma, basically trying to look at modern society and equating the business sector with Vaishyas, commerce, the government and political sector with Kshatriyas, and the educational sector with Brahmins. Basically, I'm trying to actually further the idea of kind of forming some kind of a neo-Brahmanism which will lead society in a spiritual way. How to do it, it's quite complicated because it's very difficult to promote Brahmanism these days. And Western thought is very much hierarchical in that government is above education. If you see my point, it goes upside down. To my point of view, education should be above government. And the present system says that teachers are employed by the government. The government is the employer of the teachers. So it's difficult to actually apply these points of view, but I'm trying in various ways. So I would say that on the social level, I have some ideas, but these were never realized. It's basically, it's my ideas, but it was never practiced really. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next question I'll take from an anonymous attendee. And the person is asking, thanks for the fascinating session. My question is about the general perception that people focus more on renunciation of worldly affair and move towards the total avoidance of action as a path of moksha, while careful study of Gita is opposite of it, but general perception prevails. What are your thoughts on it? Action versus...
Well, it's a very good question, very good question. And as I mentioned before, when I started my talk, that there's a great tension between work in this world, between dharma and moksha. And that's a great tension. And you may even say that this is the big story of the Indian philosophy. Indian philosophy was Vedic and humanistic. And then you had the renunciate, the Shramanas, you had the Upanishads, you had yoga, and you had renunciation, and you had the Nastikas, Buddhists and Jains, talking about renunciation. And what was the Bhagavad Gita solution? The Bhagavad Gita reconciled the two ideas. And how did the Bhagavad Gita do that? It offered action and renunciation at the same time. And where's the renunciation? The renunciation is that of the fruits of action, not of action, but the fruits of action. This is the great innovation of the Bhagavad Gita. Renounce the fruit within action. That's the big thing. And that is why the Bhagavad Gita has occupied such an important place in the Indian history, because it reconciled these two principles. Act in the world and renounce, not the act, not the dharma, renounce the fruits of action.
Right, thank you. Great. Next question is simply asking about reincarnation, your views on reincarnation. Reincarnation, Punarjanma.
What is the question about reincarnation?
Yeah, yes, just your views on reincarnation, that's all. What do you think about the idea of
my view of reincarnation?
Yes. Yes.
Well,
Yes.
Reincarnation is a very deep idea. It's not theoretical. And basically, one has to choose existentially between the idea of reincarnation and not reincarnation. It's two different points of view. We have to say, if we are reincarnated, then the whole world looks differently than if we don't think in these terms. Personally, I think in terms of reincarnation. I think this makes more sense than the other point of view, that this life is all in all. And I think in terms of my previous life and perhaps future life, I think in these terms. What can I say? I think it makes sense. I think this idea was accepted by many traditional societies. It's not something so. Also in Judaism, it's there. Also in other in mystical Judaism, it's there. I think Christianity was very much against this idea, and Christianity very much influenced the world against this idea of reincarnation for various reasons. The coming of Christ as a one-time event, and so forth. There are very interesting theological discussions about it. It's an open issue, but I think that ethically, the implications of reincarnation are also much more responsible, I would say, and ethical. And I very much would like to further ethics, basically Jain and Hindu, environmental ethics, based upon reincarnation. Yeah, the sacredness of life, seeing the trees and environment as living in various bodies, respecting them, not as resources, but as living entities, just like we're living entities. Yeah, so I think that metaphysically it's interesting, existentially it's uplifting, and ethically it's also very good. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question. I hope you can still answer a couple of more questions. Next one is from Dhruv Lele. My question is, how can we use Gita in a philosophical way to improve our existing fundamental social structures?
Well, that's what I'm trying to do in life. I'm trying to argue for the Bhagavad Gita as applicable scripture. Follow your dharma, do yoga, be spiritual, see the Gita as a way to reconcile religions, try to apply it on a social level. I'm all for that. I mean, how to practice the Gita. Basically perform karma yoga, adhere to dharma and do yoga, basically.
Yes.
You want to do bhakti, worship God, bhakti in various ways. It's all there. I mean, the Gita is very rich, and there's not one way to follow the Gita. Basically, one follows ideas according to their tendencies. This one can follow this one more, that one more. But basically, the Gita is very rich, and it's very open to being to applicability, of course.
Okay, thank you. I'll take the next question from Arshika Selvan. And the question is, Professor, you mentioned how Bhagavad Gita is a philosophy and a way of life that can be followed in the 21st century. But isn't chapter 4, verse 13, Chatur Varnya Maya Srishta, Guna Karma Vibhagesho, Tasya Kartaram Api Marg Vividya Akartam Avyayam, a little controversial as it tries to justify the caste system? The Varna and the caste.
Okay, caste system. Caste system. See, I said it's troublesome. I said that I'm getting into trouble because I support Varna. I said that. I know that. I do approve of the philosophical Varna category, that different people have different gunas constituting their nature. And I think there's a great ethical potential there, that someone who is more sattvic will be more inclined to be a Brahminical or have Brahminical occupation. Someone who's more Rajasic may be more inclined to do Kshatriya or Vaishya or Shudra with more Tamasic. It's all there. I'm aware of the evils of caste. I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that. I'm trying to distance myself from the, how you say, from the history of the last few hundreds of years. I'm aware of Ram Mohan Roy arguing with Brahmins against sati. I'm teaching that. That's not the way I'm going. But I do think that the idea of Varna is important, has a great potential, and perhaps it will have to be practiced outside of India because of all the implications it has in the Indian history. I mean, if you speak about Varnas in India, it'd be very, very difficult, considering the Indian history and social implications, to further the idea of Brahminism in India. Perhaps it will have to be developed elsewhere, just like yoga. Yoga was exported to the West, and once it was so successful in the West, it came back to India and embraced by Indians. But it had to go through the West before it will be re-imported, you can see. So maybe also this idea of Varna will have to go westwards, or perhaps eastwards, I'm not sure, but I think westwards, and have some people embrace it and see the potential and perhaps rework it, retranslate it in a new way. And if that works, I don't know, it may come back to India in a new form and re-embrace. But I don't know, it's a long path, and I'm not sure it will happen so quickly. I mean, I have some ideas there, but it's not easy to see that working. I can't see it really happening, although I want to see it happening. But that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the idea of Varna perhaps would have to be reworked, perhaps outside of India, and then return to India in a new form and be re-examined and perhaps detached from its Indian connotation and context. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Next question is, I think that will be the last question. Thank you for your time. But the last question is from Professor Ramdas. The question is, where does Bhakti Yoga fit in, the Bhakti Yoga?
What is the place of Bhakti Yoga? Bhakti Yoga.
Yes.
Bhakti Yoga, if you examine the structure of the Bhagavad Gita, Bhakti serves as the power to keep everything up. You can see the Bhagavad Gita from two directions, from below and from up. From below, you can see it as ascending the ladder, just like the Yama Niyama ladder, climbing the ladder step by step up. But you can also see the Bhagavad Gita as coming from up, that Bhakti pulls one up. This is the major force coming from upwards and pulling. Bhakti strengthens the whole structure of the Bhagavad Gita and pulls one up through a devotion. So I didn't speak too much about Bhakti, but Bhakti has a very important place in the Bhagavad Gita. And you can see the ladder as going gradually from karma yoga to bhakti yoga, as simple as that, and from bhakti yoga to pure bhakti, really.
All right, thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. I think we'll end here. You spoke already for 75 minutes already. And thank you
All right.
for your
That's
time,
fine.
your insights. And I hope everybody learned something new from you. And with that, our sincere thanks. And we hope to invite you again, hopefully in person next time, whenever we can. But for now,
Will be a
thank you,
pleasure.
and please stay safe in Israel. And we in India, everybody, please stay safe, get vaccinated, and protect yourself and your family and friends. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Okay. I will end the
Thank you
session
very
now,
much.
sir. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.